He thought he had won before the trial even started. Derek Caldwell, a real estate mogul worth millions, walked into that courtroom ready to leave his wife, Lakota, with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back. He had the high-priced lawyers, the hidden accounts, and the arrogance of a man who had never been told no. But he made one fatal mistake. He forgot who he married. When the judge looked down at the property deed Derek was waving around as a trophy, his face turned pale. One name on that paper changed everything. And by the time the gavel fell, the hunter had become the hunted. The rain battered the windows of the 14th District Family Court in Seattle, a fitting backdrop for the end of a 10-year marriage. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of floor wax and nervous sweat. Derek Caldwell checked his reflection in the dark glass of the courtroom door before pushing it open. At 42, he looked every inch the conqueror. A bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars, hair silvering perfectly at the temples, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He wasn't just here to divorce Lakota. He was here to eviscerate her. "Remember," his lawyer, Gavin Sterling, whispered, leaning in close as they walked down the center aisle. Gavin was a shark in human skin, a man who billed 4 figures an hour to destroy lives. "We stick to the narrative, irreconcilable differences, but more importantly, her failure to contribute to the marital estate. We paint her as a drain on your resources. The prenup is ironclad, but we want the house, the cars, and the portfolio. We leave her with the apartment in rent-controlled East Side, and that's being generous." Derek chuckled, adjusting his cufflinks. "She won't fight, Gavin. Lakota doesn't have the stomach for it. She spent the last decade arranging flowers and hosting my dinner parties. She doesn't know the first thing about war." He glanced across the aisle. Lakota was already seated. She looked smaller than he remembered, hunched over the polished oak table. She wore a simple navy dress, one he recognized from 3 seasons ago. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, exposing the nape of her neck. She looked fragile, defeated. Perfect, Derek thought. He had orchestrated this months ago. He had slowly moved assets, created shell companies for his new developments, and ensured that on paper his liquidity was lower than it actually was. He was leaving her for his 26-year-old PR consultant, a fiery redhead named Jessica, who made Lakota look like a ghost in comparison. But Derek wasn't just leaving. He wanted to erase Lakota. He resented her quietness, her lack of ambition, the way she seemed content to live in his shadow. He wanted to start fresh, unburdened by alimony or asset division. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Arthur Halloway entered the room. He was a legend in the state circuit, an older man with thick, wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for having zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. He sat down heavily, the leather of his chair creaking, and peered over the rim of his spectacles. "Case number 492B, Caldwell vs. Caldwell," the clerk announced. "Petitioner is ready, Your Honor," Gavin announced smoothly, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Respondent is ready, Your Honor," a voice said from Lakota's side. Derek frowned. He hadn't paid much attention to Lakota's lawyer. He expected some legal aid rookie or a strip mall attorney. The man standing next to Lakota was elderly, wearing a suit that looked like it had been bought in the 80s. He had a slight tremor in his hands and a shock of white hair that looked uncombed. Derek leaned toward Gavin. "Who is that dinosaur?" Gavin squinted. I think that's old man Abernathy, Silas Abernathy. I thought he retired years ago. He used to do property law, not divorce. Don't worry, Derek. He's ancient. He'll probably fall asleep during opening statements." Derek relaxed. It was pathetic, really. Lakota had hired a geriatric property lawyer to fight a shark like Gavin. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed with your opening," Judge Holloway said, his voice a low rumble. Gavin launched into his speech. It was a masterpiece of character assassination. He painted Derek as the tireless visionary, the self-made man who built Caldwell Estates from the ground up, working 18-hour days while his wife lived in luxury, contributing nothing to the empire. "Your Honor," Gavin said, gesturing theatrically toward Derek, "my client is a man of industry. He purchased the marital home, the Blackwood Manor, with his own earnings prior to the marriage's official profitability spike. Ms. Caldwell's name is on the marriage certificate, yes, but her name is nowhere on the checks that paid the mortgage, the staff, or the taxes. We are asking for a complete severance. The prenuptial agreement, though contested by the defense, clearly states that assets acquired through extraordinary individual effort remain sole property. We intend to prove that everything Derek Caldwell owns falls under that category." Derek watched Lakota. She didn't flinch. She just stared at her hands, which were clasped tightly on the table. "Look at me," he willed her. "Look at the man you couldn't keep." But she didn't look up. When it was Silas Abernathy's turn, the old man stood up slowly, using the table for support. He didn't have a flashy speech. "Your Honor," Silas said, his voice raspy but surprisingly clear, "we contest the validity of the prenuptial agreement based on coercion, but we are willing to set that aside for a moment. Our focus today is not on the money Mr. Caldwell made. It is on the property he claims to own. Specifically, the Blackwood Manor Estate and the land upon which Caldwell Enterprises headquarters is built." Derek suppressed a laugh. "The land? He bought that land 5 years ago. He had the deeds framed in his office." "Is that so?" Judge Holloway asked, raising an eyebrow. "You are contesting ownership?" "We are contesting the nature of the ownership, Your Honor," Silas said, "and we believe the petitioner has fundamentally misunderstood who holds the keys to his kingdom." Derek leaned back, whispering to Gavin, "Let him ramble. He's senile. I have the deeds right here in your briefcase." Gavin smirked. "Watch this, Derek. I'm going to bury them." The morning session dragged on, becoming a blur of financial statements and aggressive questioning. Gavin Sterling was in his element. He called Derek to the stand, lobbing softball questions that allowed Derek to brag about his business acumen. "Mr. Caldwell," Gavin said, pacing before the witness stand, "can you tell the court about the purchase of Blackwood Manor?" "Certainly," Derek said, projecting his voice to the back of the room. "It was a dilapidated estate in the hills. I saw potential when no one else did. I bought it for $4.5 million in 2018. I poured another $3 million into renovations. It is my masterpiece. Lakota picked out the curtains, I suppose." A few people in the gallery, mostly Derek's staff and sycophants, chuckled. "And the funds for this purchase?" "Came entirely from my private venture capital holdings," Derek lied smoothly. Well, it wasn't a lie, technically. The money came from an account in his name. Where that money originated was a complex web of loans and leverage, but it was his name on the transfer. "Thank you," Gavin said. He turned to Lakota's table with a sneer. "Your witness." Silas Abernathy stood up. He didn't walk to the stand. He stayed at his table, shuffling through a stack of yellowed papers. "Mr. Caldwell," Silas said, not looking up, "you claim you purchased Blackwood Manor in 2018. From whom did you purchase it?" Derek blinked. He hadn't expected a trivia quiz. "From a holding trust. The, Vanderwall Heritage Trust, I believe. It was an anonymous sale." "Correct," Silas said. And do you know the history of the land Blackwood Manor sits on? I'm a real estate developer, Mr. Abernathy. I know the zoning laws and the soil density. I don't care about ghost stories. It's a simple question, Judge Halloway cut in, his eyes narrowing. Answer the counsel. No, Derek said, irritated. I don't know the history. It's irrelevant. I own the deed. You own a deed, Silas corrected gently. You own the deed to the physical structure and the improvement rights. But let's talk about your company headquarters, the Caldwell Tower downtown. You built that in 2020, correct? I did. A 40-story monument to modern commerce, Derek bragged. And the land? Silas asked. Leased, Derek said, waving a hand dismissively. A 99-year ground lease, very standard in commercial real estate. I pay a yearly sum to a land-holding LLC, and I own the building. And who controls that LLC, Mr. Caldwell? Derek rolled his eyes. I don't know. Some investment group in Switzerland. My CFO handles the rent checks. Look, what does this have to do with the divorce? I built the tower. I earned the money. Lakota didn't lay a single brick. Silas finally looked up. His eyes were sharp, blue, and incredibly alert. It has everything to do with the divorce, Mr. Caldwell, because you seem to be under the impression that you are the landlord of your own life. Silas turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit Evidence Exhibit A and B. These are the original founding documents of the Vanderwall Heritage Trust and the Orem Land LLC, the entity that owns the ground under Mr. Caldwell's office tower. Gavin jumped up. Objection. Relevance. We are dividing marital assets, not auditing his commercial leases. Overruled, Judge Halloway grunted. I want to see where he's going with this. Bailiff, bring me the documents. Derek watched as the bailiff handed a thick, leather-bound folder to the judge. He felt a prickle of annoyance. This was a waste of time. Lakota was just stalling, trying to embarrass him by digging into his business deals. Judge Halloway opened the folder. He adjusted his glasses. The courtroom went silent. The only sound was the rustle of paper as the judge turned a page. Then another. Halloway stopped it. He leaned forward, peering closely at a document that looked like it was written on parchment. He traced a line of text with his finger. Mr. Abernathy, the judge said, his voice sounding different. Tighter. Is this the original grant deed from 1952? It is, Your Honor, Silas said. If you would look at the bottom of page 4 regarding the beneficiary clause and the reversionary rights of the Blackwood estate. The judge read it. Then he looked up at Derek. Then he looked at Lakota. For the first time all morning, the judge looked at Lakota with something akin to shock. Mr. Sterling, the judge said to Derek's lawyer, have you read the deed to your client's house? The full deed? We have the title summary, Your Honor, Gavin stammered. The title company cleared it. The title company cleared the sale of the structure, the judge said ominously. They didn't clear the underlying covenant. The judge turned the page to the section regarding the Caldwell Tower land lease. He read for another minute in silence. Then he closed the folder and took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Halloway said softly, you stated under oath that you bought Blackwood Manor from the Vanderwall Heritage Trust. Yes, Your Honor. And you pay rent for your office tower to Orem Land, LLC? Yes, a significant amount. And you are unaware of the officers of these entities? Like I said, it's a blind trust. The judge picked up the document and held it up. It's not that blind, Mr. Caldwell. In fact, the primary beneficiary, the sole executive trustee with the power of revocation, is sitting in this room. Derek frowned, looking around. Who? The Vanderwall family is an old name in this state, the judge said. They changed it 3 generations ago to avoid press scrutiny. They went by a more common name. Winthrop. Derek froze. The air left his lungs. Winthrop. Lakota's maiden name. Lakota, Derek whispered. He looked at her. Lakota finally lifted her head. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trembling. She looked calm. Cold, even. The deed states, the judge read aloud, that the Blackwood estate may be sold, but the land remains in the trust. Furthermore, if the occupant of the estate files for divorce against a beneficiary of the trust, the sale is voided, and ownership reverts immediately to the beneficiary. As for the office tower, the ground lease has a character clause. If the lessee engages in moral turpitude or acts against the interests of the landlord, the lease can be terminated immediately. The judge looked at Derek. Mr. Caldwell, it appears you have been paying rent to your wife for 5 years, and you just tried to evict your own landlord. The silence in the courtroom was shattered by the sound of Gavin Sterling's briefcase snapping shut. The lawyer looked pale, his shark-like demeanor replaced by the frantic energy of a man realizing he was swimming in blood-filled water. "Your Honor," Gavin stammered, his voice cracking, This is highly irregular. We were not made aware of these documents during discovery. This is a trial by ambush." "Ambush?" Silas Abernathy chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Mr. Sterling, these are public records. The deeds to Blackwood Manor and the ground lease for the Caldwell Tower have been on file with the county clerk for decades. It is not our fault that you and your client were too arrogant to perform basic due diligence. You assumed Miss Caldwell was a nobody. You assumed her silence was ignorance. That was your error, not a legal loophole." Derek stood up, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "This is insane. Lakota doesn't own my company. I built it. I hired the architects. I poured the concrete. She's just a housewife." "Sit down, Mr. Caldwell," Judge Halloway barked, slamming his gavel. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. As it stands, the court acknowledges the validity of the Vanderwall Heritage Trust documents. Given the complexity of this new evidence, I am freezing all assets listed in the petition. That includes the Blackwood Manor and the accounts associated with Caldwell Enterprises, pending a forensic audit of the lease agreements. Court is adjourned for 72 hours. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot to Derek's ears. 10 minutes later, inside a private conference room in the courthouse, Derek was pacing like a caged tiger. He kicked a chair, sending it skidding across the linoleum. "Fix this, Gavin," he screamed. "Fix it now. How does she own the land? How? She drives a 5-year-old sedan and shops with coupons." Gavin was frantically typing on his laptop, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm looking at the trust structure now, Derek. My God, it's massive. The Vanderwall family. They owned half of Seattle in the 1920s. They went dark in the 80s, liquidated public holdings, and moved everything into private land trusts. Lakota isn't just a beneficiary. She's the sole grantor." "What does that mean in English?" Derek shouted. "It means she is the trust," Gavin whispered, looking up with wide eyes. "She has absolute veto power. Derek, the clause in the house deed. It says, right of reversion upon marital dissolution initiated by non-beneficiary. Because you filed for divorce, you triggered the clause. If she had filed, maybe we could have negotiated. But you filed. You activated the trap." Derek slumped against the wall. He felt nauseous. "And the office tower?" "That's worse," Gavin said grimly. "You don't own the land. You have a 99-year lease. But the lease has a moral turpitude clause. It basically says, if the tenant brings shame or reputational damage to the landlord, the lease is voidable. You publicly parading your mistress around. The articles in the business journals about your ruthless divorce tactics? She can argue that you've violated the moral clause. So what? Derek scoffed, trying to regain his bravado. She cancels the lease. I'll move the building. Gavin looked at him like he was an idiot. You can't move a 40-story skyscraper, Derek. If the lease is voided, the improvements, meaning the building itself, revert to the landowner. She doesn't just kick you out. She keeps the building. She keeps your office, your servers, your furniture, your awards, everything. Derek's phone buzzed. It was Jessica. Babe, why has my credit card declined? I'm at the dealership trying to pick up the Porsche. Call me ASAP. You look stupid when your card bounces. Derek stared at the text. The Porsche he had promised her as a celebration gift for the divorce filing. She froze the accounts, Derek whispered. The judge froze them, Gavin corrected. But effectively, yes. Derek, we need to settle. We need to beg. If we go back into that courtroom in 3 days, she's going to strip you to the bone. I don't beg, Derek snarled, grabbing his coat. She's Lakota. She's weak. I just need to get her alone. I'll talk her down. I'll remind her who the alpha is in this relationship. Derek sped toward the Blackwood Manor. The rain had intensified, turning the sky a bruised purple. He needed to get into the house, get his safe, get the cash and the offshore flash drives before the freeze order fully propagated through the banking system. He pulled up to the massive iron gates of the estate, the gates he had installed to keep the riffraff out. He pressed the remote. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. The red light on the remote blinked, but the gates remained shut. Damn it! He rolled down the window and punched the code into the keypad. Access denied. Open the damn gate, he yelled at the intercom box. A voice crackled through the speaker. It wasn't the usual security guard, old Stan. It was a crisp, professional voice he didn't recognize. The facility is on lockdown, Mr. Caldwell. Please vacate the driveway. Vacate? I own this house, Derek screamed, the rain soaking his expensive suit arm. Who is this? This is Aurum Private Security, the voice replied calmly. We have been retained by the trust to secure the asset following the trigger of the reversion clause. You are trespassing. Police have been notified. Derek reversed the car, his tires screeching, and peeled away just as blue lights appeared in the distance. He couldn't be arrested. Not now. He drove to his office tower downtown. Caldwell Enterprises, the symbol of his power. He would go there, rally his executives, and figure out a way to crush Lakota legally. He would bury her in lawsuits until she broke. He stormed into the lobby, dripping wet. The receptionist, a young woman named Chloe, looked up with a terrified expression. Mr. Caldwell, you shouldn't be here, she whispered. Why is everyone telling me where I can't be? He snapped, marching toward the private elevator. He scanned his badge. Beep. Invalid credentials. He tried again. Beep. Mr. Caldwell. Derek turned. 2 large men in dark suits were walking toward him from the security desk. They weren't the regular building security. They were huge, military-grade professionals. Sir, you need to hand over your building pass and your company phone, the lead guard said. Are you joking? I am the CEO, Derek shouted, his voice echoing in the marble lobby. Employees were stopping to watch, whispering behind their hands. Not anymore, a voice said from the mezzanine stairs. Derek looked up. Walking down the stairs was a woman in a sharp white blazer and tailored trousers. It took him a moment to recognize her. It was Lakota. But it wasn't the Lakota he knew. The bun was gone. Her hair fell in loose, elegant waves around her shoulders. She wasn't wearing the 3-year-old department store dress. She looked radiant, powerful, and terrifyingly calm. Beside her walked Silas Abernathy, and a younger man in a sharp suit, probably a forensic accountant. "Lakota!" Derek gasped. "What are you doing here? Tell these gorillas to let me up to my office." Lakota stopped on the bottom step. She looked at him with an expression of mild pity, like one might look at a wounded pigeon. "It's not your office, Derek," she said smoothly. "The Aurum Land LLC has exercised its right to terminate the ground lease due to breach of contract and moral turpitude. As per the contract you signed without reading, ownership of the structure has reverted to the landholder." You're stealing my company." "I'm evicting a bad tenant," she corrected. "And as for the company, well, the board of directors just finished an emergency meeting. Since the company no longer has a headquarters and its assets are frozen due to your divorce proceedings, they voted to remove you as CEO effective immediately. They appointed an interim manager." "Who?" Derek choked out. Lakota smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Me. It turns out the trust also owns a 40% silent share in the bank that finances your construction loans. We called the debt, Derek. The company was insolvent within an hour. I stepped in to bail it out. I'm the majority shareholder now." Derek fell to his knees. The lobby spun. "But why? Why didn't you tell me? We were married for 10 years. Lakota walked closer, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Her marble floor. She leaned down, her voice a whisper that only he could hear. "Because I wanted to be loved, Derek. I didn't want you to marry me for the money. I wanted you to build something of your own, to be the man you said you were. I used my connections to get you permits. I used the trust to anonymously guarantee your loans. I gave you every step on the ladder. And I waited. I waited for you to say, thank you. I waited for you to be a partner." She straightened up, her eyes hardening. "Instead, you treated me like furniture. And when you decided to throw me away like garbage, you forgot that the garbage man sometimes owns the landfill." The next 48 hours were a blur of humiliation for Derek. He was staying in a cheap motel near the airport, the only place that would take cash, which was all he had left in his pocket. His credit cards were dead. His friends, the boys he played golf with, had stopped answering his calls the moment the news hit the business blogs. Billionaire Bales, Caldwell ousted by wife in shocking corporate takeover. Even Jessica was gone. She had sent him a text message that simply read, "This isn't what I signed up for. Don't contact me." He sat on the lumpy mattress, staring at the peeling wallpaper. Rage began to boil over the despair. He wasn't done. He was Derek Caldwell. He was a fighter. Lakota was bluffing. She had to be. She was too soft to run a conglomerate. She would crumble under the pressure. He needed leverage. He remembered something. The red ledger. Years ago, when he was first starting, he had done some deals that were in the grey area. Payoffs to inspectors, a few bribes to zoning commissioners. He kept the records in a small, fireproof hard drive, hidden not in a safe, but buried in the potting shed at the back of the Blackwood estate. Lakota loved gardening. She never let the landscapers touch that shed. It was the one place he knew she wouldn't look, and the security team might have missed it. If he could get that drive, he could threaten to burn the whole company down. If the authorities saw it, Caldwell Enterprises would face RICO charges. The stock would tank. Lakota's inheritance would be worthless. He could hold it over her head. "Give me my settlement, or I burn your legacy to the ground." It was a suicide mission, but he had nothing left to lose. He waited until nightfall. He wore a dark hoodie and jeans, clothes he had bought at a thrift store. He took an Uber to a trailhead 3 miles from the estate and hiked through the woods. The rain had turned the ground to mud, ruining his sneakers, but he didn't care. He reached the perimeter fence. It was electrified now, another upgrade Lakota must have authorized, but he knew a spot where a fallen oak tree had damaged the wiring months ago. He hadn't fixed it then because he was too cheap to pay the contractor. The irony tasted like bile. He shimmied under the fence, mud smearing his face. He crept through the manicured gardens he used to claim credit for. The house was dark, looming like a Gothic monster against the sky. He reached the potting shed. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He fumbled for the spare key hidden under a loose stone. It was there. He unlocked the door and slipped inside. It smelled of earth and dried lavender. He dropped to his knees, digging frantically in the corner behind a stack of clay pots. His fingers brushed plastic. "Yes," he hissed. He pulled out the small waterproof box. He opened it. It was empty. "Looking for this?" The lights in the shed blazed on, blinding him. Derek scrambled back, knocking over a rack of shovels. Standing in the doorway was Lakota. She was wearing a trench coat and holding a large umbrella. Behind her stood 2 of the Aurum security guards, their arms crossed. In her hand, she held the black hard drive. "How?" Derek wheezed. "How did you know?" "I told you, Derek," Lakota said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I did the gardening. I found this 3 years ago. I didn't open it then because I trusted you. I thought, everyone has secrets. But when you served me the divorce papers, I had a tech specialist unlock it." She tossed the drive in the air and caught it. "Bribery, fraud, racketeering. You didn't just build a house of cards, Derek. You built it on a sinkhole." "Give it to me," Derek said, standing up, desperation making him dangerous. He took a step forward. The guards tensed, hands moving to their belts. "Don't," Lakota warned. "You're already trespassing. Don't add assault to your list of felonies." "You won't turn me in," Derek sneered, though his voice wavered. "If you turn that in, the company goes down. Your precious trust loses millions. You need me to keep quiet." Lakota looked at the drive, then back at him. She looked tired. "That's the difference between you and me, Derek. You think money is the only thing that matters. You think I would protect a corrupt legacy just to keep the stock price up." She dropped the hard drive onto the concrete floor. Then she lifted her heel and stomped down. Crack! Derek screamed as if she had stepped on his hand. "No!" She stomped again and again, until the casing shattered and the microchip inside was ground into dust. "I don't need the leverage," Lakota said, kicking the debris aside. "And I don't need the company to be dirty. I'm liquidating Caldwell Enterprises, Derek. I'm selling the assets, paying off the debts, and rebranding whatever is left. I'd rather lose money than keep your corruption alive." She turned to the guards. "Escort Mr. Caldwell off the property and call the police. I want to file a restraining order." "Lakota, wait!" Derek cried as the guards grabbed his arms. "Lakota, please! We can work this out! I still love you! I was confused. It was a midlife crisis." She paused at the door, her back to him. "It wasn't a crisis, Derek," she said softly. "It was a revelation. You showed me exactly who you are. And for the first time in 10 years, I believe you." She walked out into the rain, leaving him in the mud. The 72-hour recess felt less like a pause and more like a slow suffocation. When the doors to Courtroom 4B finally opened again on Thursday morning, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The air was no longer thick with the humidity of the rain. Instead, it was cold, sterile, and sharp. Derek Caldwell walked to the defendant's table, but the strut was gone. In just 3 days, the golden boy of Seattle real estate had withered. His charcoal suit, once crisp and tailored, now hung loosely on his frame, wrinkled from being balled up in the back seat of his car. He hadn't shaved, and the silver stubble on his jaw didn't look distinguished. It looked desperate. He sat down heavily, avoiding the gaze of the gallery. Gavin Sterling, his high-priced shark of a lawyer, sat a distinct 2 feet away from him. Gavin was busy organizing his papers, his body language screaming that he wished he were anywhere else. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and he was already looking for the lifeboats. On the other side of the aisle, Lakota sat in a pool of calm. She wore a cream-colored wool suit that looked soft, yet impenetrable. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders, and her face was devoid of the anxious, people-pleasing expression Derek had been used to for a decade. Beside her, old Silas Abernathy looked energized, his eyes twinkling behind his spectacles like a predator who had just cornered its prey. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. Judge Arthur Halloway swept into the room. He didn't look at the lawyers. He didn't look at the gallery. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and placed a stack of documents, thick, bound in red tape, center stage on his desk. "Be seated," Halloway commanded. The room settled into a tense silence. The only sound was the hum of the overhead lights and the frantic tapping of Derek's foot against the floor leg. "We are back on the record in the matter of Caldwell versus Caldwell," the judge began, his voice gravelly and serious. "During the recess, the court-appointed forensic accountants, in cooperation with the trustees of the Vanderwall Heritage Trust, have conducted a thorough audit of the marital assets and the liabilities of Caldwell Enterprises." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He picked up the top document and peered over his glasses at Derek. "Mr. Caldwell, when we began this trial, you stood before me and claimed to be a self-made titan of industry. You claimed your wife was a financial burden. You claimed sole ownership of an empire." I did, Your Honor," Derek croaked. "The audit tells a very different story," Halloway said, flipping the page with a snap. "It appears that for the last 7 years, your empire has been operating at a significant deficit. Your construction projects were consistently over budget. Your occupancy rates were inflated. In normal circumstances, you would have been bankrupt 5 years ago." Derek gripped the edge of the table. "The market was volatile. I was maneuvering." "You were not maneuvering, sir. You were being subsidized," the judge corrected sharply. "The audit reveals a series of 18 separate bridge loans totaling $40 million. These loans were issued by a shell company called Aurora Holdings. Mr. Caldwell, do you know who owns Aurora Holdings?" Derek shook his head, sweat beading on his forehead. "No. My CFO handled the financing." "Ms. Caldwell owns it," the judge said, pointing a finger at Lakota. "Or rather, her trust does. She has been quietly covering your losses for half a decade to prevent your public embarrassment. Every time you failed, she wrote a check, and you repaid her by serving her divorce papers." A murmur went through the courtroom. Derek looked at Lakota, stunned. She didn't meet his eyes. She was watching the judge with serene focus. "Now," the judge continued, his voice growing harder, "we must address the division of assets. Since the reversion clauses have been triggered, the Blackwood Manor and the commercial tower are off the table. They belong to the trust. That leaves your personal liquidity and portfolio." Derek sat up straighter. This was his lifeline. "I have my private investment accounts, the crypto holdings, the offshore stocks. That's mine. I earned that." Gavin Sterling cleared his throat nervously. "Your Honor, regarding those accounts—" "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," the judge barked. He turned back to Derek. "Mr. Caldwell, it seems you have a habit of cross-collateralization. To fund your lifestyle, a lifestyle that far exceeded your actual income, you took out personal lines of credit against those investment accounts." "So?" That's standard leverage, Derek argued. It is, the judge agreed, until the primary asset, your company, collapses, which it has. As of this morning, the creditors have exercised their right to seize collateral. Your stocks, your crypto, and your offshore holdings have all been liquidated to pay down the corporate debt you personally guaranteed. Derek felt the blood drain from his face. All of it? All of it, Holloway confirmed mercilessly. But we aren't done. The liquidation covered the business debt, but it did not cover your personal expenditures. The judge picked up a receipt from the pile. A 65-foot yacht named the Conqueror, purchased 6 months ago. Down payment, $400,000. Monthly slip fees, $5,000. You are in default. He picked up another paper. A lease on a penthouse apartment in the Arts District. Occupant listed, Ms. Jessica Tate. Security deposit and 12 months rent paid upfront. $120,000. Drawn from a margin account that is now called due. The judge looked at Derek with pure disdain. You spent money you didn't have to impress a woman who wasn't your wife, using credit backed by your wife's inheritance. The level of financial incompetence and moral bankruptcy here is staggering. Gavin Sterling stood up, looking desperate. Your Honor, given the catastrophic change in my client's circumstances, we move for spousal support. Mr. Caldwell is now destitute. He has no home, no income, and significant liabilities. Ms. Caldwell is a billionaire. Surely a maintenance stipend is appropriate. Silas Abernathy didn't even bother to stand up. He just leaned into his microphone. Objection, Silas wheezed, a dry smile playing on his lips. I would direct the court to Exhibit C, the prenuptial agreement. Derek closed his eyes. He remembered the day he signed it. He had forced Lakota to sign it. He had slammed it on the kitchen counter and told her, I'm going to be rich, Lakota. I need to make sure you aren't just with me for the payoff. If we split, you get what you came with, and I get what I made. Mr. Caldwell insisted on a strict, no alimony clause. Silas read from the document. Section 8, paragraph C. In the event of dissolution, neither party shall be entitled to alimony, maintenance, or spousal support of any kind, regardless of financial disparity or hardship. It is ironclad, Your Honor, drafted by Mr. Sterling himself. Judge Holloway looked at Gavin. Is this true, Counselor? Gavin slumped. It is, Your Honor. Then the motion is denied, the judge ruled. Mr. Caldwell, you built your own cage. Now you must live in it. The judge shuffled his papers into a neat stack. The court rules in favor of the respondent, Lakota Vanderwall Caldwell. The marriage is dissolved. The prenuptial agreement is enforced. Mr. Caldwell is ordered to vacate all trust properties immediately. Furthermore, due to the finding of bad faith litigation, Mr. Caldwell is ordered to pay the respondent's legal fees. I can't, Derek shouted, his voice cracking into a sob. I have nothing. I'm $12 million in debt. I'll be on the street. He turned to Lakota, his pride finally shattering completely. He scrambled out of his chair and fell to his knees in the middle of the aisle. Lakota, please, he begged, tears streaming down his face. You can't let this happen. I'm your husband. We had 10 years. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Just pay the debt. It's nothing to you. Please, Lakota, don't destroy me. The courtroom went deathly silent. All eyes were on Lakota. Slowly, gracefully, she stood up. She smoothed the front of her skirt. She looked down at the man who had spent a decade making her feel small, the man who was currently sobbing on the floor. I didn't destroy you, Derek, she said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room. You destroyed yourself. I just stopped fixing it. She turned to the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. Court is adjourned, Judge Holloway slammed the gavel down. Bang! The sound was final. Absolute. 2 bailiffs moved forward to escort Derek out. He was limp, weeping openly as they dragged him toward the heavy oak doors. Lakota gathered her purse, nodded to Silas, and walked out a separate exit, her head held high, leaving the ruins of Derek Caldwell behind her. 6 months had passed since the gavel fell in Judge Holloway's courtroom, but for Derek Caldwell, it felt like 6 lifetimes. The alarm on his cracked smartphone screamed at 4:30 a.m. Derek groaned, rolling off the thin, stained mattress that lay directly on the floor of his studio apartment. The room was a converted garage in the industrial district of Tacoma, miles away from the gleaming spires of Seattle. It smelled perpetually of damp concrete and the exhaust fumes from the auto body shop next door. He sat on the edge of the mattress, rubbing his face. His hands, once manicured and soft from lotion and leisure, were now red, chapped, and peeling. His back ached, a dull, throbbing reminder of 8-hour shifts standing on linoleum. He shuffled to the small sink in the corner to splash cold water on his face. He avoided looking in the mirror. He knew what he would see. A man who had aged 20 years in 20 weeks. The silver hair that was once distinguished now looked wiry and unkempt. The arrogant glint in his eyes had been replaced by a hollow, haunted stare. He dressed in the dark, black slacks that were 2 sizes too big. He had lost weight since he couldn't afford steak dinners anymore, and a green polo shirt with a coffee bean logo embroidered on the chest. The daily grind. That was his life now. He grabbed a piece of stale toast and walked out into the rain to catch the 5:15 bus. As he sat on the plastic seat, squeezed between a sleeping construction worker and a teenager blasting music, Derek closed his eyes and remembered the heated leather seats of his Bentley. He remembered the silence of the cabin, the smell of new car leather. A tear leaked out, hot and shameful. He wiped it away angrily. He still told himself it was temporary. He was Derek Caldwell. He was a visionary. He just needed one break, one investor who didn't read the tabloids, one person who remembered his genius, not his divorce. The shift at the coffee shop was brutal. It was the morning rush, a chaotic symphony of hissing steam wands, shouting customers, and clattering ceramic. "Faster, Derek, you're moving like a turtle." The voice belonged to Kyle, the shift manager. Kyle was 22, had a patchy beard, and wielded his tiny amount of power like a dictator. In his old life, Derek wouldn't have hired Kyle to shine his shoes. Now, Kyle held Derek's livelihood in his hands. "I'm going, Kyle," Derek muttered, steaming a pitcher of almond milk. "That's sir to you, newbie," Kyle snapped, snapping his fingers. "And you messed up the order for the lady in the corner. She wanted oat milk, not almond. Remake it. And it's coming out of your tips." Derek gritted his teeth so hard he thought they might crack. He poured the milk down the drain, 50 cents of waste that felt like a failure, and started over. He walked the cup over to the customer, a woman in a business suit typing furiously on a laptop. "Apologies, ma'am," Derek said, placing the cup down. "Here is the correct order." The woman didn't even look up. "About time. You guys are incompetent today." She waved him away like a fly. Derek stared at her laptop screen. She was looking at a real estate spreadsheet. He recognized the software. It was a program he had implemented at his old firm. He saw a mistake in her formula instantly. "You have a circular reference in cell C4, Derek said instinctively. "It's throwing off your projection by about 8%. The woman finally looked up, her expression one of utter confusion and disdain. She looked at his apron, his name tag, his tired face. "Excuse me," she scoffed. "I think I know how to do my job, barista. Maybe stick to making foam art and leave the finance to the professionals? Derek opened his mouth to argue, to tell her he had built skyscrapers, that he had managed portfolios worth more than her entire firm. But the words died in his throat. Who would believe him? He was just the old guy in the green apron. "Right," he whispered. "Enjoy your coffee." He walked back to the counter, feeling small, smaller than he ever thought possible. Around 10:00 a.m., the rush slowed down. Derek was wiping down the counter, his mind drifting, when the bell above the door chimed. "Oh, look who it is! My favorite power couple!" Kyle's voice pitched up an octave, dripping with sycophancy. Derek didn't look up immediately. He just kept scrubbing a stubborn coffee stain. "Hey, Kyle," a booming male voice replied. "Give us the usual, and make it quick. We're heading to the airport. Private hangar." Derek froze. The rag dropped from his hand. He knew that voice. It was Trent Sterling, not related to his lawyer, but a former competitor. A man Derek had crushed in a bidding war 3 years ago. A man Derek had publicly called a second-rate amateur at a charity gala, and the laugh that followed, that high, tinkling laugh. Jessica. Derek wanted to run. He wanted to hide in the back room, dive into the dumpster, vanish into the floor. But his feet were lead. "Derek!" Kyle barked. "Register, now!" Derek turned slowly. He felt like a man walking to the gallows. He approached the register. Trent was wearing a cashmere coat and a watch that cost more than Derek's debts. Jessica was clinging to his arm, looking more glamorous than ever in a white fur stole. She was glowing. "What can I get for—" Derek started, his voice cracking. Trent looked up from his phone. He blinked. He squinted. Then his jaw dropped. "No way," Trent whispered. A slow, cruel grin spread across his face. "No freaking way!" He nudged Jessica. "Babe, look, you are not going to believe who is taking our order." Jessica looked. Her eyes went wide behind her oversized sunglasses. She lowered them slowly. "Derek?" she gasped. The silence that stretched between them was heavy enough to crush a building. "Hello, Jessica." "Hello, Trent," Derek said, striving for dignity but sounding only defeated. "I heard things went south, buddy," Trent chuckled, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "But I didn't know they went espresso south. Wow, the mighty Derek Caldwell, asking me for $3.50. "Do you want the coffee or not?" Derek asked, his hands trembling. "Oh, we want it," Jessica said, her voice sharp. She leaned over the counter. "You know, Derek, you promised me a Porsche. You promised me a life of luxury. Trent just bought me a villa in Tuscany. It's funny how things work out, isn't it? You called me a gold digger. Maybe I just have an eye for quality. And you? Well, you're clearly a knockoff." She laughed again, and this time it cut Derek deeper than any knife. Trent paid with a black Amex card, the kind Derek used to have. The machine beeped. "Add a tip," Trent said loudly. "Put $20 on there. Buy yourself some soap, Derek." They took their cups and walked to a table near the window, their laughter echoing through the shop. Every giggle felt like a lash against Derek's back. He stood there, the transaction receipt in his hand, feeling the utter ruin of his existence. He wasn't just broke. He was a punchline. He turned to the back counter to hide his face. Above the espresso machine, a small television was playing the local news on mute. Suddenly, the screen changed. A breaking news banner flashed in bright red. Derek squinted. The headline read, "Historic donation. Vanderwall Trust pledges $50 million for city parks." The camera cut to a live feed of a press conference. There was a podium surrounded by microphones, and standing there, bathed in the flash of cameras, was Lakota. Derek stopped breathing. She looked, magnificent. She wasn't the quiet, mousy woman he had ignored for 10 years. She commanded the room. She was wearing a tailored suit, her hair styled perfectly, her posture regal. She looked like a queen addressing her subjects. Beside her stood a man. He was tall, distinguished, with kind eyes. He placed a hand on the small of her back as she spoke, a gesture of support and affection. The chyron on the screen identified him. Dr. Julian Thorne, Director of Philanthropy and fiancé. Fiancé? Derek felt a physical pain in his chest, a sharp, twisting agony. The camera zoomed in on Lakota's face. She was smiling. It was a genuine, radiant smile, the kind Derek hadn't seen on her face in years. A reporter in the crowd asked a question. The closed captions scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Reporter: Ms. Vanderwall, to what do you attribute your sudden public emergence and success after years of privacy? Lakota leaned into the microphone. The caption read, Lakota: I learned that sometimes you have to trim the dead weight to let the garden grow. I spent a long time in the shadow of someone else's ego. Now, I'm finally standing in the sun. Derek stared at the words. Dead weight. She wasn't talking about the business. She was talking about him. He wasn't the victim of a bad lawyer. He wasn't the victim of a cruel judge. He was the architect of his own destruction. He had a woman who loved him, a fortune he didn't earn, and a life most men dreamed of. And he threw it all away because he wanted more. He wanted to be the big man. Now he was just the man who made the coffee. Derek! Kyle shouted, snapping him out of his trance. Stop staring at the TV. The toilet in the men's room is clogged. Grab the plunger. Move! Derek looked at Kyle. He looked at Trent and Jessica laughing in the corner. He looked at Lakota's glowing face on the screen. For a second, a flash of the old Derek rose up. He wanted to untie the apron, throw it in Kyle's face, and storm out. He wanted to march to that press conference and demand to be heard. But then, the reality crashed down. He had nowhere to go, no car, no home, no money. If he lost this job, he wouldn't eat tomorrow. He swallowed his pride. It tasted like ash. On it, Kyle, Derek whispered. He grabbed the plunger from under the sink and walked toward the bathroom, his head bowed low as the laughter from the front of the shop followed him down the hall. And there we have it. Derek Caldwell ended up exactly where his choices led him, cleaning up messes, while the wife he underestimated built an empire without him. It's a brutal reminder that arrogance is a loan with a very high interest rate, and eventually, life comes to collect. What do you think about Derek's fate? Was living as a barista a harsh enough punishment, or did you want to see him go to jail? And what about Lakota's final savage line on the news? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you loved this story of high-stakes divorce and instant karma, please smash that like button. It helps the algorithm show this to more people. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Next week, we have a story about a bride who discovers her groom is actually penniless at the altar, so you don't want to miss that. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.